Get your free copy of the complete tutorial at www.teachucomp.com/free.
Now we will examine the ways that you can alter a pivot table to change what data is displayed and calculated. As we saw in the last lesson, you can check and uncheck the fields shown in the Choose Fields to Add to Report list within the Pivot Table Field List task pane to show or hide their display from within the pivot table. Once the fields have been added to any one of the four quadrants shown at the bottom of the task pane, you may click and drag the fields shown in these areas from one quadrant to another in order to rearrange the display of the data if needed. When working with the fields in your pivot table, note that if you click into a worksheet cell that is outside of the pivot table area, the pivot table will become deselected and the pivot table field list will be hidden. You can simply click back into a cell within the pivot table to reactivate the pivot table and display the pivot table field list again. You can also filter what information is displayed within each of the columns and rows. Notice that each time that you add fields to the pivot table, the field will appear with a small drop-down arrow to the right of the field name within the actual pivot table. You can click this drop-down arrow to show a menu listing of all the unique values within that column or row. Values that are checked will display in the pivot table, and values that are unchecked will be hidden from the pivot table. You can check and uncheck the values in each column or row as needed to display just the data that you want to see. When you're finished checking and unchecking value items in the drop-down menu, click OK at the bottom to set your filter choice. Note that you can also select the Select All option at the top of the manual filter list in order to select all values in the field for display once again. You can also make use of the buttons shown in the Options and Design tabs of the Pivot Table Tools Contextual tab within the ribbon to change the appearance of your pivot table data. The Expand Entire Field button will expand a section that is outlined within your pivot table. The Collapse Entire Field button will collapse any detailed data that's shown in your pivot table. And these are shown in the Active Field group on the Options tab within the Pivot Table Tools Contextual tab within the ribbon. Also notice that in this same group, you can click the Field Settings button in order to open a dialog box where you can change the settings of the currently selected field within the pivot table. Also, if you need to enable the display of the field list for any reason, you can click the Field List button that's shown in the Show Hide group on the Options tab in order to show and hide the pivot table field list in the program.
Like what you see? Pick up your free copy of the complete tutorial at www.teachucomp.com/free.